If you've been able to be here through the whole month of August, you know that we are coming to a close of a sermon series based on the prophet Daniel, a book that is apocalyptic in nature, that spends 6 chapters doing this, and then 6 chapters talking about the end times. Even chapters 4 and 5 will do a little bit of apocalyptic conversation, but still working within story. The chapters 7 through 12 are just all about the end times and the vision that Daniel has. You might remember that our first week we discussed Daniel and his friends, Daniel and the boys, as I like to call them. We know them best as Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. They are taken from their homeland in Israel into Babylonia, and there they are called to be leaders. They were leaders when they left, and now in exile, they are called to be leaders again, sharing that leadership alongside many who may have been born into that time and place. And they decided that instead of giving up their dietary laws, that even in exile, that they would remain faithful. And it turned out that they were able to be stronger than those who ate from the king's table. And so we celebrated that they were faithful even in exile. In chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and only Daniel could interpret it. Nebuchadnezzar turned to all different types of peoples, and he wouldn't even tell them the dream. He said, if you're smart enough, you can figure out the dream. Well, God gifted Daniel with the vision, and the 4 of them went in front of the king, and he gave the dream. And so, even in interpretation, Daniel remained faithful. Last week, we studied chapter 3, and Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they too showed that they would be faithful, that they would not bow down to statues, even a tall golden statue. They stayed true to the God of their ancestors, the one true God of the Israelites. Despite the fiery furnace, they remained faithful, and God delivered them. This week we come to maybe that story, which is the most famous of all, Daniel and the lion's den. And so it is with great anticipation, at least on my part, that we come to this final story in this sermon series, because we've all been there. We've all been in the mouth of the lion. And here we are. God remains faithful. Let us try to understand this day how we can remain faithful to our God, who always remains faithful to us. We turn now to the scripture. It's in your bulletin if you'd like to follow along. We will be reading from Daniel chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. So the presidents and the satraps tried to find grounds for complaint against Daniel in connection with the kingdom, but they could find no grounds for complaint or any corruption because he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption could be found in him. The men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." So the presidents and satraps conspired and came to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors, are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an interdict, that whoever prays to anyone, divine or human, for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions. Now, O king, establish the interdict and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." Therefore, King Darius signed the document and interdict. May God add blessing and understanding to the hearing of this word this day. There's a story about a man who was walking in nature at the top of a mountain by a cliff. The man happened to be a well-known atheist, and he was fine with that in his life until he happened to fall off the cliff. Clutching to a tree clutching to life, he got an idea. And so he said out loud, God? No answer. But he thought he would try again. Oh, God, if you're real, come and save me, and I will believe in you. And the heavens opened up, and the voice of God spoke through the clouds and said, I am here. And the atheist said, oh, thank you for coming to my aid. I am so glad that you came to save me. If you save me, God, I will go forth and tell everyone how real you are. Even though I have professed not to believe before, I will believe and I will show the world. And God said, oh yeah, I've heard all that before. And the atheist says, no, I mean it. And God said, all right, I will save you if you mean what you say. And here's how I will save you. Let go and fall. Let go and fall? Do you think I'm crazy? Are we crazy to let go and fall? Do we trust enough to let go and fall? Or are we just a little too much like the atheist? We want to hang on. Thanks be to God that Daniel let go every time. He was persistent in his faith. Never did he say, God, I'm going to hang on to this tree. I'm living here in exile. You have forgotten me. You've allowed me to be moved from my homeland. I'm going to try to do this on my own. Not once did Daniel say, uh-oh, it looks like trouble is headed my way. Maybe I need to start paying attention to God now. Persistent in faithfulness. This is a story that leads us to understand how we are to be in faith. You know the story. You know the story. What might be interesting to you about the story is that King Darius is the one with whom Daniel is interacting now. There's been a change in leadership because early in the book of Daniel, who was king? Nebuchadnezzar. And that's good through the first 3 stories that we studied in our sermon series. But in chapter 4, something happens, and Nebuchadnezzar is taken by God into the wilderness. At the end of chapter 4, it says that Nebuchadnezzar is going to come back and reign as king. But until then, we get new kings. In chapter 5, Belshazzar. Remember, Daniel is Belteshazzar. That's his new name as he's been given, but we always call him Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar's son, Belshazzar, comes in and becomes the king. And he's having a party one night, and he says, hey, remember those dishes that we took from the Israelites? Bring those out. Let's use those for the party. And God doesn't like it. And out of nowhere, a floating hand comes. I don't know about you. I would have been checking my food, making sure it was all good. I would have been checking my drink to make sure I hadn't had too much. Because if I see a floating hand, I'm a little worried. And Belshazzar was. Because the hand comes and writes in language that he doesn't understand, and he too tries to figure it out. And everybody says, well, Daniel's your man. You want to figure this out? You talk to Daniel. And so Daniel comes in and he gives the explanation, the interpretation yet again. O king, as your father has been told, your rule will not last forever. There is only one rule that lasts forever, and that is the reign of God. Only God's kingdom will last forever. And indeed, that night, Belshazzar dies, and Darius takes the reign. And Darius is newly crowned king, and all the satraps and presidents and governors and all the leaders want to just kind of brown nose a little. Not only that, they wanted to catch Daniel. They wanted to catch him. They didn't like him. He was too good. He was too pure. He was too honorable. He was too faithful. and not to their government, not to their king, but to his God. And so they say, "Oh, King Darius, be our God. For 30 days, be our God. Make it so that no one can worship any idol, any statue, nothing human or divine, except for you, O King, because you, our new King, are worthy to be worshipped." And Darius thinks this sounds like a good idea. It's good to be the king. There's a lot of ego in being the king. And so to have everybody pray to you instead of anyone or anything else, well, that sounds pretty good. And so he makes the decree, and it happens. And of course, the satraps and the governors and those who are jealous, they find Daniel praying 3 times a day, by the way, kneeling and praying 3 times a day. Now, I don't know about you, but my prayers don't usually bring me to my knees. I pray in different ways. But he did that 3 times a day. That sounds a little more like other types of world religions than even our own, doesn't it? So anyway, they say, "Darius, Daniel, he's not following the decree. He's not doing what you said, and you can't take it back. You've made this promise, you made this pledge in too many different ways, and it can't be changed." And Darius puts him off for the rest of the day until evening. He is trying to find a way to save Daniel. If he liked Daniel so much, surely he knew that 3 times a day he would go into his room and pray to his God. Why did he even make the decree in the first place? If he loved Daniel that much, thought so highly of him that he wanted to save him from this wrath of throwing him into the lion's den, maybe he forgot. Who knows? But he's worried for his friend. So evening comes and they come to him again and they say, "Come on, King. We've been telling you all day. You got to do this. You said you would." And so he does. He takes Daniel and he throws him into the lion's den and he goes back to his house, to the palace. He can't eat. He can't sleep. He's so worried. He comes the next day and removes the stone and says, "Daniel, was your God able to deliver you?" And Daniel walks out unscathed and says an angel was there. And the angel shut the mouths. And Darius is like, "I told all of you that this was a good and honorable man. Bring me those who accused him and made me throw him into the lion's den." And so all those satraps and all those governors and all those rulers are brought to Darius. And he says, "You thought it was good for him? Let's see if it's good for you." And he throws them into the lion's den. Not just them, their wives, their children. Throws them all into the lion's den. And even before they hit the ground running, the lions attack them and break their bones into pieces. That's what the scripture says. And then Darius makes a pronouncement that no one, just like Nebuchadnezzar before him, he makes the pronouncement that no one can dishonor the God of Daniel, for only the God of Daniel is able to deliver even those from the lion's den if that's what God chooses to do. What a great story. And we can argue left and right the science of it. We can argue left and right the faith of it. We can argue back and forth if we want to. But all the story is really trying to say is that in difficult moments, God is with you. And if you can be persistent in faith, you can overcome great challenges, maybe even the jaws of the lion. I know a young man. His name is George. Jorge, but he goes by George. I met him when he was 15. You know, sometimes we choose the lion's den, and sometimes the lion's den just finds us. George was one of the funniest, caring, wonderful kids I've ever known, who was struggling so much. When I first met him, his father had been in prison for many, many years. I don't know what the charge was for, but I know it was gang-related activities. Just 1 year prior to my meeting George, his brother had been shot and killed on the streets of Kansas City because of gang-related activity. And the gang was coming after him. They wanted him. He was part of the family. You're part of the family. This is your family. You were supposed to be part of us. And he would go in and out. He struggled mightily. His mother was so in grief about the brother that she kind of lost sight of George for a while. That's my interpretation of that. And he tried. But school was a place where he could come and he didn't have to deal with pressures and he didn't have to worry and he was safe. And as far as we knew, none of the members of that gang were at the school trying to get him. Eventually, he failed out. Didn't have enough classes that were passing to be able to stay at the school where we were, and he had to go to public school. He graduated on time. It wasn't from our school, which means he didn't get some of the advantages that he might have been able to get, but he got his diploma, and things were starting to look up. He and I are Facebook friends. And what I know is that right now, life isn't as good. He seems to have gotten lost again, and the pressures of gang life seem to be upon him yet again. Got a big tattoo, talked about who his only brothers are. Life has its ups and downs. George's life has had its ups and downs. There's things that he could have chosen to do differently, but how could we blame him? Life had been so hard. Is he alone? He may feel it. But as people of faith, do we believe that this George is alone? Not even in the lion's den living of his own life is he alone. We know this lion's den living. We've had difficulty in relationships, whether they be friends or family or close folks. We've had difficulties with work situations. We've struggled to do the right things in the right situations. We have depended too much on ourselves instead of seeking help from others. Maybe we have just turned our back on God at some point in our lives. We get lion's den living. People are put in our lives to help us sometimes, and we turn to them to get out of the lion's den. Some of us have been given the gift of a deep inner strength, and sometimes we rely on ourselves to get out of the lion's den. But if we forget that these friends or these family members who are so important to us, who are so significant in our lives, if we forget that these people are gifts from God, if we forget that this intestinal fortitude that we might have in our lives is a gift from God, then we don't get to have the relationship with God as fully as we could, even if we start to escape the lion's den. Because these gifts come from the one who is faithful to us. And when we recognize, then life can be even lived more fully. God can be even more a part of our lives. We can understand that we've been building the blocks of leading up to a persistent faith. Whether you're in the lion's den right now or not, you will be. I'm sure of it. I know that I have been. I know that I will be again. It's just the nature of life. But the more that we can rely on God, and whatever way that God helps us get through different situations, the better life can be. And I'm not saying it's going to be all happy and Christmas every day. It's not going to be puppy dog enjoyment every day. But we can make it. More often, we can seek the joy in life instead of the negative. We can make it. We can be content. We can share our faith with others. There's a song that we used to sing. We sang a lot of Vacation Bible School songs earlier this morning, church camp songs. Lord, you are more precious than silver. Lord, you are more costly than gold. Lord, you are more beautiful than diamonds, and nothing I desire compares to you. When God is the one we desire most in our lives, like Daniel, we'll be able to make it. We will be able to be faithful despite the lions. I believe that with all my heart. May we work diligently at finding the confidence and the strength and the courage to have a persistent faith in all moments of life. Thanks be to God. God.